Welcome and congratulations on purchasing your animal wheel. This is Korea's #1 cat wheel called the Star Cat Wheel. Well, without further ado, let's build it. Okay, once you open the box, you're going to see this, more or less. And so first thing we'll do is move the carpet pieces to the side. There should be 4 pieces. And now we're going to assemble the base. So we only need a few of all of these parts. So the first thing will be this chunk. Little slots on the sides. So we need one of these. You'll see the same piece. So we got 2 of those. They look like little handles, little suitcases. You'll need both of those. This is the main part of the base. Has this nice little dipped U shape, so it's easy to identify in the box. The last thing we'll need, so actually you'll see, is it'll cut it, so that's how you'll know it's this box. There's a few boxes in here, so we want this one first. And you should see the included accessories with it. And we'll just have to cut this open. So when we open that box, you should be able to see a bag of wheels right on top. So that's the first thing we're going to assemble. You'll see 2 types of wheels in here. You have the larger main wheel, these smaller side wheels for pins, small silicone sleeves, and they look kind of like plugs. So grab a big wheel. You're going to put a plug in one side, one in the other. Put a pin through it so it looks like a free rolling wheel. And then to make sure the pin doesn't move, you're just going to slide on a silicone sleeve on both sides. Give it a nice pinch, make sure it's all good, that it can roll. There you go. That's one wheel done. Just do it 3 more times. So you might have also noticed there's a couple tools in this box, one of which is the rubber mallet. We'll need that later on just to tap the pieces into place. There's a nice snug fit. And then this little ratchet driver multi-tool, actually. So what I want to show you about this, on here there's a bit of a collar. So you need to pull that down in order to actually slide the bit in and out. And you'll notice these ridges are so that you can lock the bit at different heights. Along here, you can actually get 3 different settings. So on the left side, for loosening something, the center is actually a fixed position, and then on the right, to ratchet the other way. Okay, now we're going to grab 2 more things from that first box. The first, you'll see a slender long piece of wood. We need this. Place that down. And there's 2 bags of hardware in the box. We need the smaller bag with the large square nuts. Let's dump out those square nuts right now. So we're looking for these. And we need those kind of handle pieces of wood that I mentioned in the beginning. So lay it face down so that you have the slots. Now you're going to take one of these square nuts. In the slot, you're just going to use your thumb or whatever and just press it in as deep as you can first. Then, using the little ratchet tool that we just discussed, make sure you push that nut as deep as you can. Don't worry, the hole doesn't go straight through the wood, so it will just stop on its own. But just make sure you press all the way down. And there's 6 holes, 6 slots, 6 nuts. All pressed in, and now give a little extra. And that's that. Now we're going to start putting together the actual base. So we need these big pieces, and on the, I'll call it the inside, you're going to see all these slots. This is the side we need right now. We're going to need the bottom center one, and we're going to need the sort of inside one on the outside. These ones, okay? The first one is this center bar, okay? It's that thin, smaller one. We'll go into the bottom hole, like so. And we want to make sure that the slot side is down. Put them together. On our way to having a base. Now, those nuts that we set aside, those bolts that we set aside before, we're just going to hand tighten this for now, okay? And you'll see why in a minute. And I'll show you this side. There's 3 holes, okay? We want the bottom center hole first. And the reason why we want to hand tighten this is because we need some flexibility at the top to slide in these pieces. So the wheels are going to be going into these slots, which means we want the U-shape up. And as mentioned, stick it into that second hole from the front, like so. And same thing, just hand tighten for now. Final piece. This hole, slide it in, pop it in on the other side. Just hand tighten for now. Last one. And you can use your multi-tool to give it a good tighten. You don't need to bury it into the wood, but just make sure it's tight. Now, if you have it at home, using something with a little drill, electric drill, is a little bit faster. So try that too. Check, make sure it's not loose. Next, we're going to come back to the handle looking things because that's what they are, they're handles. So on the end part, we're going to see there's two more slots, right? That's where we're going to put these. So it will initially just sit on top. You can push it in as much as you can at first, but it should be pretty snug. And that's because we tighten the bolts. And as I said before, you don't want to mash those bolts in, otherwise this won't slide in. Now, we're going to give it a little tap. However, I would recommend keeping the vinyl bag on the rubber mallet. Because all this wood is white birch, if you smack it with the rubber itself, it might leave some marks. So the vinyl will prevent that. Once it's in, we're going to tap it all the way down to the bottom of the groove. And remember to go alternating sides. There we go. Once it's nice and smooth, it's inset. Now, just like before, those screws we had, pop it in the side. And there's only one hole where this will line up, so you don't need to worry about where to put it. Same thing as before, hand tighten. And then, once you're happy, fully tighten. Okay, repeat for the other side. Time for the wheels. Now this part, also pretty simple. Now, we pointed to those upward U shapes, right? We know that's where the big wheels are going. Now what's unique about this is on the left side, or whichever side you're looking at, there's a groove that goes higher. So that's so that you can easily set one side of the wheel in and then just slide it down. Just stay in the groove, and then on these center pieces, these bracers, there'll be a little spot where it'll sit. Like so. Double check, it still rolls. And do that for all four. Good. And last, this is important, little side wheels. Now, on the side wheels, you can see this little bumper on one side, but not on the other. So we want the bumper to be facing down. And we're going to insert it into these little plus-shaped slots. And they just pop in. Once you have your main wheels set and your side wheels set, then I recommend taking your rubber mallet again and just giving them gentle taps. They are completely set in their grooves. Double check. Smooth as butter. Something else I want to show you, if you flip over your base, in that first box in that bag, you'll see that there's these four bumpers, I'll call them. Now, they can be used to stop scratching your hardwood floors or something like that. They can be used as anti-vibration and anti-slip. So, they just go on the base, on the feet, like so. There you go. Perfect. Okay, base is done. Now we're moving on to phase two, the actual wheel. So, if we go back to the big box, you will see two very large rings. Now, I will recommend that you put down some sort of carpet, a yoga mat, or something, just so that we don't scratch the nice wood. We're going to set the ring down, and we want to set it so that the kind of dog bone looking insets are facing up, okay? Let's move the second ring out of the way, and then there's two boxes in this big box, our main starting box. They have little characters on them. Don't throw those out, we need those. So cut those open, slats that look like this. I'm going to go back to that small box, and you will find there's one special piece of slat in there. We'll need that. And that second bag of hardware. More of these square nuts, which we're going to need. So, for all of these slats that are in the big box and then the special one, you're going to need to do what you did before. Put that square nut into a little slot on either end. And then using your tool, give it a little push to make sure it's nice and inset. So we want all of the pieces to look like this. Okay, while you were putting the nuts in all the slots, you might have noticed that there's some interesting kind of numbering system happening here. So I've organized them so that you should have somewhat equal piles. I'll show you here. Down on one side of each slot, or each slat, you will see a number system. This one is a 4. 3, 2, 1. And then this one is 1 dot, 1 dash. This is a special piece, and we'll talk about that in a second. Now if you have your piles with 4, 3, 2, 1, there should be 6 number 4s, 6 number 3s, 6 2s, 5 1s, and then the 1 special one. The reason why it's special is because it has this little square cutout. And this is actually where the tubing will go for the pipe that runs through the whole thing with the water system and the little fluorescent fish. Moving on, now that we understand the numbering system and everything's set, we can start putting the slats into the ring. So we will start with that special piece. Well, I said there's a dot and a dash. On the ring, you will find the corresponding number of dots, right beside sort of the dog bone looking things. So find the one that has a dot and a dash. And then the edge, the little foot, we'll call it a foot, that has the dot and dash, goes into the slot that has a dot and a dash. Just match them. It's that easy. The next one, I'm going to work this way so you can see. So the next one I see is a 2. That's it. Just follow the number system. Okay. Now what I want to show you is, as I mentioned, with the special one, there's that slot for the beginning of the tube to actually insert. Now you can see where the pipe, the tubing, will run. You can see it has a nice flow. If by chance I wasn't paying attention to number system, and let's say instead of a 4 here, I had a 2, and then it just doesn't match over here, which is no good. So that's another way that you can double check that you're doing the right thing. And just continue all the way around. Now I'm inside my little fortress. Okay, I want to show you a key feature that will make this next step pretty easy. Now for me, it's on this side. If I remove this slat, 2 important things here. One is that this is the only spot where there's 2 holes along the entire ring. This bigger hole is going to be for the brake pin to stop the wheel from spinning. And then the other feature that we need to see is right here. This is a perfect circle all the way around except for right at this spot. There's a slight bump. Now the reason why we need to mention this, or note this, is so that when we put the next ring on top, this is so that we can actually see where we line up so that we don't have to try to guess when we're trying to push everything in, okay? I'm going to cover this up for a second as I put my slat back, and I'll get my second wheel. Now, as mentioned along here, I will look for, on this ring, where there is this little bump. It doesn't have to be perfect yet. It's just so that we know that these are all lined up. Now, I'm going to go back to that big bag of hardware we had before. Dump out all those screws. And one by one, we're going to go around and we're going to insert this screw through the top ring and then down into the slat. And for now, just hand tighten. Then, once you go all the way around and you have everything in place, it'll sit a lot better. Okay, at this point I have all my screws in, and what I wanted to show you is what I was explaining, how it'll just start to settle itself once you get them all lined up. There we go. Ah, did you see that? Did you hear that? So, as I've gone around one by one and put them in place and tightened them, it slowly starts to settle itself. Even though just gently hand tightened, screw heads popping up, looks good, feels good, way more stable, and take your multi-tool or your drill and just tighten them all. All right, good. Now, of course, we need to stand this up. Pro tip, do not one-handed yank this up because these are obviously not secure on the other side. So we need two hands and, as always, lift from the legs. All right, now our wheel is standing. Good. So what's next? Well, we got to pin this side. Now imagine this is a clock face. We just want to put in 4 pins for now. One at 12 o'clock, just give it a little hand tighten. 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. Now you would think I would say go all the way around, but I'm going to show you a little bit of a time saver and like a back saver kind of thing. So let's tighten these. And now we can pop it onto the base. I prepared the base beforehand. I put it behind the wheel. Probably want to do the same. We'll pop this on top, and then I'll show you what I mean by the time saver. Give it a little check. Silent. So why would I put the wheel on the base before I'm even done? Because it's really easy now just to rotate the holes to meet rather than having to bend over the whole time. So whether you're standing and you want to go from the top around or from the side, since it's already nice and snug, we don't need to worry about hand tightening. Just go straight into tightening the actual nut. Much more comfortable. And just work your way all the way around. A couple final notes when you're tightening all of these screws. First, if you're using the multi-tool, make sure that once you get the screw in, we want to make it as tight as you actually physically can. Don't over crank it, but once it gets tight, make sure that you give it a good you want some oomph behind it. Then we know that it's good and secure. We don't want this thing falling apart when your animal's using it. The other thing is, if you're going to be using a driver, I would recommend that you kind of guide it with your finger as you're going up to the bolt, because you don't want to miss and then puncture this nice wood. The other thing too is, unlike the multi-tool, where I encourage you to give it a good tighten, you don't want to overdo it, because the torque in this, then you're going to end up stripping the screw or burying the screw into the wood. We don't need that. Once it's all good and tight, you want to do an inspection, of course. So, run your hands along here, and then as you start to roll the wheel, you might hear or notice that one of the screws is sticking out a little bit. It's possible you just forgot it. So, you want to make sure that the screws are actually nice and tight, because, again, this should be silent when it's rolling. So if you hear rubbing, like that, that's not good. Or even worse, if the screw is too far out, it'll start to chip away at the wood. Make sure it's nice and in, and then just roll the wheel and let your hand glide over all the screws. Excellent. And then do the other side. No issues. Next, we need to put in the hose line. Okay, so back to that first box that we unpacked and it had the manual in it. In that box, we need this bag. You'll see some cable ties in it, some sandpaper, a bunch of knickknacks. So the things we will need, the cable ties, and you should see a bunch of sheaths, small sheaths. We'll need those. And then the hose. Now when installing the hose, we're going to go back to the wheel. Now if we place that in its slot and we start trying to push the hose in and follow the line, as you can see over here, it pops out. We have a solution for that, and I'll get to that in a second, and that is to do with the cable ties. I will say, I would, if you can, do this with two people. If one person holds it down and one person feeds, really easy, goes quickly. If you're by yourself, then there's a little trick. Temperature. Temperature is a big deal. If this is a little bit warmer, then it's very malleable and it goes pretty smooth, especially with the cable ties. If it's cold, then it becomes pretty difficult. I wouldn't recommend that. Also, you might be thinking, well, why not just make it a little bit thinner? We did that before in previous versions, but then cats' teeth or their nails would puncture it. So through our tests, we found that this thickness was the ideal thickness. So a little bit of inconvenience now means longer lasting. It's worth it. Okay, we'll put the cap back in, and it does take a little bit of strength. Push the cable, or the hose, into the groove as you go. And now, you'll notice, I'll mark right here, there's sort of a vertical extra cut, extra line on this. And that marks where we'll put one of the cable ties. What you want to do is put the little the clear sheath on the cable tie, and then feed the cable tie through and around the hose. Just like everything else, you don't want to go extremely tight right from the beginning. Just a little bit to hold it in place. And then you can work your way down, feeding the hose in. And at each marker, see, I've got more hose in and it's staying put. That's what we want. At each marker, we just put in another cable tie. The sheath is to make sure that the tie obviously doesn't go through, and then again, we don't want to mark the wood. There's our mark over here. I did it backwards. Good. And just keep going all the way around. Just before you connect the hose into the actual fitting, we need to go back and make sure that everything is nice and snug and it's set down into its groove. So go through, give it a good push, and then bring back the rubber mallet. Give it a little tap. Make sure it's right in there. And then reach around and give it a nice tighten on those cable ties. So on the back side of the wheel, when we're tightening these straps, you really want to give it a little crank with your hand, and then you might notice that those little sheaths are sticking out. We don't want that. So again, the rubber mallet, give it a little tap. And then make sure nice and tight. Try this one. And of course, we don't want these cable ties sticking out and making all that noise. So just take your scissors and give them a little trim. And work your way all the way around. Now we're going to look at cutting the hose. Once you've secured everything on both sides, you have some excess, and in order for it to fit into its housing, we have to trim it. So I have a second housing here to show you what I'm talking about. Now the hose is already feeding into this side, and we need the hose to come in here, but right now it would end up somewhere here. So using this line, you want it to meet basically in the middle. So using this line as our gauge, we're going to mark that on the hose with a pen, and that's where we will snip. Okay? Put a pen here, put the housing in, lay the excess hose over top, and then on that line, just off to the center, we're going to make a mark. Looks pretty good. And then we'll trim. Now, if in doubt, go fat, go bigger, because we can always trim a little bit back as we go. But if you go too short, you need a new hose. Give it a snip. Then fit the hose into its crevice, into the housing. Pop it into place. And then we'll put one more strap to hold that nice and snug. Just before we put the water into the actual hose, you want to go through and make sure one more time that everything is nice and snug and set into its groove. So go around and give it another little bop with your hammer. What you might notice though is, again, it comes down to weather. Depending on where you live and the temperature, you might notice it still kind of bubbles out. But that's why we gave you plenty of extra cable ties and sheaths. So if you need to, you can put together one more, like so, and then tighten it in those middle sections as well. Nice and snug. Good to go. Almost ready to put the water in. There's a couple little things we need to do first. Now, do you remember this? I called it a brake pin. You need to grab that from the first box that we unpacked. And what you're going to look for along the ring is there's a hole. So this is your brake pin hole. And you're going to roll this down and put the brake pin in that bottom center spot. Another key thing I need to show you, and the reason why we have the pin down here, well, that's because on the side here, and then kitty corner from that, you'll see there's a very faint divot. This divot is actually the water line. We've optimized how much water to put into the tube so that you get maximum fish swim, and there's no breaking, and it's been maximized. So this is a key point after you put in the brake pin. Now, in your box, you had this bottle. This is what will fill up, and you'll notice that there's something in the bottom. That's the ink or the dye. Don't wash that out, we need that. So once you fill up the bottle as much as you can in the top of the cap, you give it a good shake, magic, you're gonna have this. We're looking for this kind of color. Next, we're actually going to pull out the brake pin. We don't need that at the moment. The reason we have that in was so we can check the water level, so we have an idea of what we're aiming for. Now let's roll the wheel back around, grab the housing, and pull out the extra hose that we had inserted before. And you don't want to come down to the very bottom. You're looking to come to somewhere in this sort of quadrant. The little pink cap comes off your bottle, and we're going to insert the tip into the housing or into the hose. We're going to start filling it up, and slowly we'll have to roll this up. And then we're watching, so we know when the housing gets near the top, and we'll see that water line, and we know that we're in good shape. Here we go. And it should take basically the whole bottle. A little bit more. And let's check. Bring those up. And now when I look, I can see across here and across here, the water looks pretty level. Before we go any further, you need to put the brake pin back in. So I'm just going to do it on my side. Pop that in. Okay, cool. Now, the next and very important part, also the fun part, putting in our little fish. So you'll have a bag with 3 fish. This one is kind of a deluxe random one. These two I want to talk about for a moment. This fish, the pure pink one, has, in our liver tests, this is the one that cats tend to like the most. So we recommend that you start with this fish, and then eventually as they get used to it, you can switch to this one. However, both fish have fluorescence to them, so at night they glow. So it'll also engage your cats at that time. This one is a lot stronger at night than this one. So choose whichever one you want, but we recommend to start with this one. So I will do that too. Take this guy, and we'll bring it up to our tube. Now, we also recommend that you put it in tail first, and then kind of give them a little, oh, there we go. And then connect tubing in the housing. That feels good. And we had mentioned a long time ago that right here, at this point, we want to put one more cable tie, just to make sure it's nice and snug. Looks good. Just like before, we'll give it a little tap. Make sure it's tight. Give it a snip. Cool. Back down here. Pull out the brake pin. Let's give it a spin. Watching the water passes through the housing nicely. Picked up the fish. So a couple things. We recommend you only use one fish at a time. If you use 2, they get stuck, and then that's no fun. Also, the dye that we used in here is eco-friendly and it's safe. I do want to tell you that actually this is safe ink. You could drink this if you want to. I wouldn't recommend it, but if it's punctured and your cat or your dog or whoever ends up drinking it, it's okay. Nothing to worry about. You're almost done. Next, we got to put on the track, right? So, in your first box that we opened, there's 3 different lengths of Velcro. It will look like this. First one we want is the long one, and there should be 6 strips. Sticky. Next, what we're going to do is where there was the nut that we had inserted before, that will act as our guide, okay? And we don't recommend that you take off the backing of the Velcro, the entire thing at once. It just gets sticky and it goes everywhere. It's bad news. What we want to do is just little chunks at a time. You have a lot more control that way. And then line up your edge with the edge of the nuts. So you're going to leave a little gap between the very edge of your ring and then the inside. Trying your best to keep a straight line. Can be a little bit tricky though. And then work your way around. And eventually you get into a nice rhythm, a nice groove, where you're just pulling and rolling at the same time and keeping a nice line. Cool. And then do that all the way around on both edges. Once that's done, moving on. We're going to look at what to do with the smaller Velcro pieces. Now you may have noticed that on the inside of the wheel, there's all these kind of L shapes, there's right angles. They're not just a pretty design, they're actually a smart feature. When we want to put on these little Velcro pieces, those denote where we actually need to put this. So where the tubing has sort of a straight line, we're going to put these Velcro strips on either side of that. And that's what these little squares show us. They tell us where to put the corners. And you can insert them the same way we did the big strips all the way around. Just pulling off the backing bit by bit. One more. Give it a little press. And last piece of Velcro that we'll need is the smallest piece that you would have noticed. Now, along the straight parts of the tubing, we put the shorter Velcro, but there's still some space there at the curve. So that's what these tiny ones are for. And again, you'll note that there's the little 90-degree marks, and just pop it on. Excellent. And do that all the way around. All right, carpet time. So, pretty self-explanatory, really. We need to put the hump where it fits. Set it in. And that's always a good place to start, is where there's the center hump. And then the rest just kind of falls into place. You want the edges to line up with the edge of the slat. And as you're going along, don't be afraid to give it a good tug, a good yank, and make sure that it sits nicely. And then you may find, when you get to the end, if it doesn't line up quite the way you want it to with the edge of the slat, then, as I said, just give it a good yank. Kind of stretch the carpet a little bit and pull it into place. Looks pretty good. When you're putting the opposite side down, you'll note that there's actually a different shape to that other carpet. So this one, the end is the curve. It's not the flat edge. So, flip that around. You just line up the edges, put it in, and just like before, you need to give it a little tug, do so. Excellent. Once you get your 4 pieces of carpet on, now you may have realized from before when you're putting on the mini pieces of Velcro that you have some left over. We need those now. So you're going to go back to where the ends are meeting in the center piece, peel back each side, and just take one of those mini pieces, pop it in the middle, right on the edge, because you can see the Velcro on the backs of the carpet, so you just want that to line up and press it down. Now while I'm doing this, I will mention a couple things about the carpet. You can actually dry clean this carpet, so if it gets full of fur or whatever else happens to it, then you can take it for dry cleaning. So that's a really nice feature. Also, this carpet was designed so that It does not absorb liquids or odors or anything like that very well. So it's easy to clean if something gets spilled on it. One more. Looking pretty good. As we're nearing the end of this whole process, you might see that you have a few leftover pieces, and that's good. We sent those so that in case something happens, you have backups. Also, you'll notice that there is that piece of sandpaper. Now this is just so that as you run your hand around the wood, if you notice any rough spots, like here, you can just give it a quick rub. It's a very fine sandpaper, so it won't really it doesn't damage the wood. Don't worry. And check, things feel pretty smooth. Nice. And then of course, make sure you hang on to the brake pins. So you have 2 brake pins. Now if you put both in, it makes it really easy for cleaning. Now that it's a little more stable, give it a little tilt. Easy. On an ordinary day, you'd probably just have one in or none, so your cat can actually use it. If you have both in, we've seen that cats end up using this as a cat tower, just to hang out. People put blankets on top and they have a good nap there. And the final thing is that with 2 pins in, it makes it really easy to move. Last thing I want to tell you about this, I promise. It's really strong. In fact, it's been tested up to 120 kilograms. That's like 260 something pounds. So, if your cat doesn't use it, at least you could use it. Thanks for coming on this journey with me, and enjoy your cat wheel. I know I will. Bye.